Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our Therapy Mastermind Circle today in our expert talk. And I'm really excited to have Francesca Maximé with us today. She's one of my favorite people. She's amazing. She's done an incredible podcast. I'd love her to talk to you a little bit about how to access that. She also has a website, maximayclarity.com. She's involved in everything. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and she'll expand on it if she needs to. She's Haitian, Dominican, Italian, and American IMTA certified mindfulness meditation teacher, mentored by Jack Kornfield. He's amazing. She's also an SEP, somatic experiencing practitioner. She's an focusing oriented therapy practitioner, a relational life therapy couples coach, a focusing oriented therapy practitioner, and an award-winning poet, author, and former television news anchor and reporter. She just sits still and never does anything. You kind of can just see that she's just one of these people that never makes a contribution. Oh my gosh, this is amazing, Francesca. And she's based in Brooklyn, New York. I've gotten a chance to see her there. We hung out at the Rubin Museum a while back, and we've known each other for quite a while now. I really enjoyed being on her podcast, and I just have been so impressed with the contribution she's making for diversity and all sorts of different topics. She's a very Renaissance woman, I would say. Her curiosity goes like the sun in every direction, and something I deeply appreciate about Francesca. So I want to welcome you. Thank you for being on the call. I'm so excited to have you.
Diane, it's an honor and a privilege to be a student, and now potentially, sharing the space with all of the folks who have learned from you, as I have so much, and are so appreciative of that. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Well, welcome. I want to just start with her title for today is Your Deepest Self is Already Connected. Your Deepest Self is Already Connected. I love that title. Makes me feel good just thinking about that, and addresses our interconnectedness and our self-connectedness. I just wanted to maybe interview you a little bit in terms of the beginning of like how you were attracted to the type of work you do, what you feel is so important and meaningful in your life and has high impact, and I know already has high integrity.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think there's just so little seeds of what I would say about what drew me to the work that I do now are in the intro. The Haitian, Dominican, Italian American, part is my mixed ethnicity. So I do have this, this multiplicity, if you will, like Walt Whitman says, I am large, I contain multitudes. And I think that there's a part of me that just necessarily has already and always been walking different worlds and in different worlds and in different spaces. I grew up in a white home, and I grew up in an Italian home, and I went to pretty much a white school, and I sort of was introduced to my sort of blackness, if you will, when I went to Harvard, when I went as an undergraduate to school. And then, I sort of lived my life as this Hispanic who didn't speak Spanish, this person who was Black who, really kind of grew up with white people. And, I kind of was always walking these different places. And I think, as a news anchor for many, many years, I was exposed to all kinds of stories and, all kinds of plights. And, I was really in the trenches of a lot of trauma in a lot of ways. 9/11, Catholic Church pre-sex abuse scandal, all kinds of things that I was, really with people who were victimized, people that you would, probably see in your offices, but I was interviewing them for stories. And, when after that, after some personal traumas, I had a really bad breakup, abrupt, too much, too fast, too soon. Then I had a bad experience with a publishing, person with a family rupture and a poetry book that I wrote that was also very traumatic. I really kind of hit rock bottom. Like I really just felt like I was just splayed. I just couldn't really figure it out. And one day, someone figured it out for me. I was literally arrested. I spent a night in jail. And I was with a lot of women who had been there before. And my good fortune was that I had, in this case, my mom, who was able to bail me out and get me out and move on. And I took that time to really sort of take stock and sort of leave the journalism or put that on pause and go see a somatic experiencing practitioner that my mom had introduced me to, who was also a mindfulness practitioner. And then that opened up that world. And the more I was practicing it and learning about it and the neurophysiology of it, and the more that I was immersed in the meditation teachings, I started working and learning from Jack, and had the good fortune to be mentored by him. And he then said, well, this thing about like racial equity, and this thing about you may want to look into that. And so that was my invitation to start to step into doing the work around social location, positionality, some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and where are we in the order, if you will, in what is sort of a top-down society, like it or not, and how do we get to that your deepest self is already connected, that we're not, sort of cutting off parts of ourselves that we may feel ashamed by, even if we do become aware of our privilege, and that we feel like we are still, allowed to be on the earth and connected, even if we have lighter white skin privilege or social class privilege or whatnot. And we can also be really in partnership with people who are marginalized in some way based on any number of things, whether it's race, whether it's ability, whether it's, discrimination against sexual orientation or anything like that. So that's kind of the story. And for the last few years, I've been doing that. Now I have my practice here in New York, and I see people not in person necessarily all the time, but online also. And I teach other therapists and stuff about trauma and racial and social justice on the Be Here Now network with the podcast you talked about.
I'm so grateful that you are a pioneer in this work. I mean, it's a big field. It's a big job. So I feel like as we're studying it, sometimes it's always the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much to know and to learn and to become sensitive and aware about. And I know you've done a lot of work with this, and really we're hoping to put a call out to therapists about racialized trauma and social location, and a lot of different awarenesses today to sensitize ourselves and to deepen our knowledge and our sensitivity and our compassion and our ability to see what's really happening in a shining a light on that. So thank you. Would you like to start with social location, or where would we like to open this up?
Yeah, I think that would be just a fine place to start. If we could just maybe have the first slide. Your deepest self is already connected. Help for light and white skin privileged therapists in exploring social location, power, privilege, and equity, and how healing invisible collective systemic and structural trauma helps you, your clients, and the world. And the reason why I started just with that sort of longer explanation of the talk is the real sense that the work, when I talk about, you'll hear me talk about this and we'll talk more about it, the work, meaning the investigation as to where my social location is, that really has a lot to do with feeling cut off, but not knowing why you feel cut off. Tara Brach talks about it as a sense of separateness. So as a therapist, a lot of the times, if we have lighter white skin privilege, the people who are sitting across from us look like us. And we don't have to like question that or think about that as much. But as the world changes, we have people who are more diverse. They have different backgrounds. They have different experiences. And so what is it that we haven't known so much about ourselves that if we do the work personally and we turn our eyes inside, helps us then be able to meet the people who's sitting across the chair from us or in the room with us, or however you want to do it, that in a different way. So going to that slide about the social location or the positionality, these are words that you'll hear in certain circles. You'll see in the middle, it's titled personality, but it could really just be, you, whatever the you is. And the internal circles are internal dimensions of age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. Just sort of being able to name and identify what those are. So for example, if I were leading a training, or if I were actually trying to embody what we're talking about now, I would say, hey, I'm Francesca Maximé, a Haitian, Dominican, Italian, American, coach here in Brooklyn, and I work on trauma. My affirming pronouns are she, her, and hers. We are on Lenape and Canarsie land, the indigenous land that I am now sitting on here in the Brooklyn area of New York, that we call Brooklyn now. I'm a cisgendered, heterosexual, mixed ethnic female of a, socioeconomic class that would be middle to middle class, or, upper middle class or whatever. and I'm able-bodied and in good health and have an Ivy League education and you know, advanced degrees and things like that. And that all of those things play out as we go from the middle of the circle to the outer level of the circle. Things like income, personal habits, recreational habits, religion, educational background, work experience, appearance, parental status, marital status, external dimensions, geographic location. All these things play into what we're able to do. So it's not exactly, I'm sure all of the listeners are familiar with the ACE studies and the ACE scores. It's not exactly tantamount to that, but it does point to things such as, if you're married, you may have certain advantages. If your parental status was, you know, divorced or something, you may have fewer advantages. If you're less attractive by Western beauty standards, for example, as a news anchor, because I didn't have straight hair, it was very difficult for me to, you know, literally fit into the box. Whereas a person who had straight hair, it was very easy for them to do their job in terms of appearance. Educational background, if you don't have, you know, a college or advanced degree, that you're at a disadvantage. If you're from a minority religion, we see a lot of persecution of people who are Muslim or people who are Jewish or people who are, you know, not in this sort of Christian religious sort of, you know, faith, which is fine. It's just the question of knowing, are you in a dominant place or are you in a place that is otherwise marginalized and can be the recipient of a lot of hateful attacks and trauma, and what that impact is collectively. And then these other outsider rings, like the organizational dimensions, like, you know, where are you working? The division, the seniority, the location, do you have union protection, your management status? All of those things kind of matter because as the, you know, recent COVID epidemic has really sort of shown to us, a lot of the people who are not able to be in the sort of more middle of the circle with these more dominant identities that are pushed out are the ones who are jobless, are the ones who are getting infected, are the ones who, you know, are the ones who've frankly died a lot of the time, more often than those who have more privileged positions. And so understanding where you sit is important, and being able to name and call attention to that and be okay with that and not be in a shame state about it if you do have privileges or get stuck in, you know, what some have called white racial fragility, if you do identify as white or light skin privileged, but to actually be able to move into a place of connection to say, okay, well, I'm aware of where I am. I also am aware of what I've inherited, meaning that I may have inherited wealth, whereas gerrymandering or redlining or other kinds of policies that have, you know, really prohibited people of African-American descent to own property in the same way that whites were allowed to, regardless of your initial place. For example, my family was Italian. They were able to work and get educated and those kinds of things. And certainly being Italian at the time that my grandfather was coming up and was a laborer was not a privileged position. You know, nobody wanted that at the time, but they have moved into a different place because they have light and white skin privilege. Whereas the history of enslaved people in this country definitely puts other people, for example, at a different advantage or disadvantage when it comes to things like skin color. And you could add immigration status or first language, you know, being something different. You could add anything to that. That's not an exhaustive list. It's just something to sort of get the mind working.
A good point, a good place to start. It's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and just sort of to continue with that, or to kind of move into the next piece of that. Why is this relevant, or why is this important? If you look at the next slide of the world population, you'll see that the world population, this isn't a great slide, but it's the best I could do for now. You get the gist of it. Pretty much 60% is Asian, 17% African, only less than 10% European or white, 8%, 9% Latin American, 5% North American, and less than 1% Oceanic. And what this is really just sort of trying to show us is that whatever the dominance is around sort of these imperialist, inheritances that we all live with, regardless of whether or not we have some sort of subscription to it. It's just sort of conditioning in much the same way that we have imprinting. When you look at your neurobiology, when you look at your, the way in which our conditioning, our attachment styles are developed, that these are all also impacting us, that it's not just our smaller environment of our early caregivers, although that is very much a part, but what they carry. So you could talk about intergenerational trauma, or you could talk about, whatever your attachment style is, but you can also then come to understand how these things came into be. And in, social work, for example, they'll talk about the master, level of, things, the macro level of things, I should say, the meso level, the micro level. So yes, we work on the micro level, but also these more macro, systemic and structural issues affect people, including those who are in privileged positions. So the invitation is to lean into starting to understand that a little bit. And then when you do, to then move into doing deeper work, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the reason why it's beneficial to you is twofold. One, like I said in the beginning, a lot of folks feel separate who are in privileged positions, who inherit lighter white skin, simply because there was so much that had to be given up to leave Europe and to come over and to be a part of this American legacy, that even though we may not have had people who were direct, owners of, enslaved people, that we certainly have the benefit of having inherited a privilege that we did not have to work to do, that someone with a different pigmentation it's not something they can escape and wouldn't want to, because it's who they are. And yet we live in a structural system where police brutality and violence will still show up in ways that for a lot of lighter white skinned people, it just wouldn't. For example, if you're doing a welfare check, or a neighbor calls on a welfare check, there are many reports that, a police officer might enter the home and it ended up as a police involved shooting with the death of the apartment inhabitant, as opposed to, we're not talking about people in the streets. We're not talking about drugs. We're not talking about violence. We're talking about that there's a triggering.
You're not even
that
safe
happens.
just being in your home.
Exactly.
Minding your own business.
That's right. That's right. And so just even attuning to the absurdity of that. And when someone who is a Black American hears another story of that, and it isn't reported or talked about, or hears a friend say something like, well, they must have done something wrong, or gee, there must have been a reason, or, well, what if there isn't? What if it is that, we use the word, oh, I got triggered. Well, why do we use that word?
Right.
Because there's, folks who have that nervous system response that, and then the overall conditioning that isn't grounded in curiosity that we talk so many people about. And this is how it plays out socially a lot of the time. And so we just have to be attuned to that. So if we do have someone who's in a marginalized position, for example, in this example, a Black person sitting across from us in our office, and that, something like that has just happened, and we don't have any awareness of what's happening in the collective consciousness around that, then we won't really be able to meet them in a place of attunement. And so that's why I'm looking at that chart and just sharing it, is because, it's not even like that's the dominant, it's not even like that's, Asians, Africans, we have all, we know the browning of America, and, the next, I think it's 2040 or 2060, it's going to be majority minority in this country. People are going to be more like me, where they're just like a cornucopia of stuff, and, it's fine, it's great, but it also will just have to be one of the things that we lean into. And that's why doing some of the work around these other classes, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, you can ask me some questions maybe before that, is so important to set the stage for our embodiment, as opposed to hearing about it for the first time from the person who's sitting across from us, or from avoiding talking about it out of our own discomfort, or from defending or deflecting or denying, or from not actually having anyone who's different from us in our offices. because we're already radiating like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't know that. I don't,
Not
that's not what
receptive to it, or I don't understand it, or I'm not attuned around it.
yeah, like, you know, like I wouldn't, don't come to me for that. And then that shows up too in like, what's your sliding scale like, you know, like, are you able to offer things to folks who are the folks here in New York, for example, during the height of the COVID crisis, all the people who are doing the deliveries of groceries and the people who are doing the laundry deliveries and the food deliveries and, you know, the Seamless or Grubhub or whatever they call it, Dash Door, things like that.
Right.
They're not people who are in privileged positions, but if they needed trauma therapy, if they wanted to see someone, we could offer something there too, even in times that aren't these overt crises. Because
Right.
you know, there, you know, it's a social issue, it's a
It's
structural
really
issue.
acknowledging the wealth gap. There's such a big wealth gap. And
Well,
I think many people of white light skin aren't as aware that that's structurally enforced, like the redlining, right? And that they have this idea, well, just work harder, you can have the American dream, you know. It's not, oh, it doesn't, that's not a sensitive perspective. It's kind of based on our national value of self-responsibility, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. But we have to understand that we're starting from, it's like running a race, but you're already one lap ahead, you know,
well,
and
you're
not realizing that, not acknowledging that that's true in any way, from an education perspective, from a financial perspective, from a social position perspective. And when you are in the more elevated social spot, it hasn't been a problem for you, so you don't see, sometimes, that's why getting sensitized is so important, you don't actually see your own advantage.
right, right. And I think if we look at the next slide, it was speaking to exactly what it is that you're just saying, is the difference between equality, equity, and reality, and what liberation or connection would really look like, embodied connection.
Oh,
And
that's beautiful.
so you can see how, to your point, Diane, that those with, you know, that there's a different level, there's a different way of thinking about it. And those extra boxes underneath the person under the reality is what you're talking about. Inherited wealth, the wealth gap. I mean, my family worked very hard. They did do that. And nobody doesn't work hard. They're not working hard right now. They're working 3 jobs. If you're a Mexican immigrant, if you're, you know, doing a nanny job for some of these Park Slope parents in Brooklyn that I'm, you know, that even I'll see in my offices who are, you know, from the Caribbean, they're working hard. They're not working.
Right,
You
right.
know, and they're also not separate. They're not a they, they're a we.
Well, the other
So
thing I became aware of too is that even with the hard work, like often we get accolades for that, like we get some kind of acknowledgement, whether it's in our paycheck or whether that's, you know, I don't know, an award, something like that. But so often people that are working really hard, they're putting in all this effort, and they're not, because of their color or their sexual orientation or whatever, because the minimization or diminishment might be happening automatically, they don't even get credit for the work they are doing. You know, they don't get promoted, they don't get a bonus, they don't get an increase in salary. It's like this, even when it's going well and they're achieving what they want to achieve, often they're still overlooked or not seen.
yeah, and I think that a lot of that is because the piece of work that I'd like to speak of next, which is doing the work, um, is really the difference. Diversity and inclusion efforts, for large measure, you know, people who work at agencies or organizations might say, oh, well, we, you know, we tried that, or we do diversity trainings, or, you know, even a lot of the really well-intentioned trauma program initiatives that I've, you know, been fortunate enough to talk to, you know, the founders of, you know, we offer scholarships and things. Okay, that's a great start. That's a nice invitation to assist. Um, and the work around, well, do you really know what the story of the Statue of Liberty is? Maybe not. It had shackles on it when France gave it to us. Why? Because America was a country founded on the labor of enslaved people who were owned.
Wow, that's powerful. I actually didn't know that. That's an important
And
thing to know.
it was denied because of the reasons why many people don't want to have messy conversations around these issues now, because it brought out the brutal reality. And so if you actually see it, this is from Joy DeGrue's Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome book and class, which I highly recommend. It's a 10-week class that she offers online. I recommend it for all therapists, no matter your creed or race or ethnicity. Just understand, what they don't teach you in school, that there are a few shackles at the very bottom by her feet, by Lady Liberty's feet. But, taking a class like that, reading a book like that, reading a book like Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad, doing a class like whiteawake.org, which I'll send you all of these for your listeners. Patty Dye's course on racism, who I
can
also...
speak to that directly. I'm in that course right now. We're just finishing it up. It's wonderful.
I would love for you too, because I think that you come away with a different understanding and embodiment, and a different level of curiosity, and also of just allowing. At least that was my experience. But why don't you speak to it, Diane, since you've just taken it?
Well, I felt I was really appreciative of so many things in the course, but certainly social location, really looking at that, getting the hardcore facts on redlining that happened when FHA started to offer these, really attractive loans, but only to people of white or light skin, and that weren't actually allowed to loan to blacks. I hadn't known that. That just horrible injustice, and stops wealth from happening. And so I was so impressed by there's a lot I could say, so I don't take too much time, but how it's structured into our legal system, it's structured into our mentality, it's structured into our real estate property owning possibilities. And of course, many people know this, but the huge number of young African American males that are incarcerated, we have more black people now. The numbers are really climbing for women too, in prison for nonviolent offenses. We have more in prison period than we had as slaves in 1850s. I mean, it's almost like a shift from slavery to another form of slavery by incarcerating people and having them work and produce. And they're working for many popular companies. They're producing their products for, I don't know, pennies on the dollar.
Well,
so
that's
a cheap labor force is another not a nice way to say it either, but it's just, I think slavery is more accurate. But even companies that you would recognize, and I'm trying to remember some of them, I don't want to misquote here, but I remember
Mike Bloomberg,
being struck by Victoria's Secret was one of the people. And so it's not like we shouldn't have people being productive, but so much of it's moved away from education when you're and rehabilitation. Now that so many prisons have become corporatized and they're not federally run anymore, it's like money made by how many people are in the beds, and they want to keep, and we keep escalating our numbers in prison. It becomes a sort of a profit motive now to have people in prison, which is just insane, and especially dropping out the educational focus. And I cut you off about Mike Bloomberg.
No, it's beautiful. I was just saying that he was caught with using, there were some folks, the prison labor was, even used in making calls when he was running for president and stuff like that, which he stopped.
Oh my
but
gosh.
This is a subcontracting thing that's done that you wouldn't know. And I think your point is well taken, in that we've essentially, that's called the school to prison pipeline. There's a name for it, that we have basically turned enslaved people into incarcerated people. And I think the key point there is the economics. And we don't really want to look at this. If you want to talk about this, look at Naomi Klein's work. She's incredible around the economics of this. There are a lot of authors who have explored this. Michelle, I can't think of her last name now, but there's just a lot of people who've explored this. And the point is that we like to think that we were founded and created on our own rugged individualistic, labor and whatnot. The reality is not that. I remember in college, there's the canon of literature, which is, I was an English major, and then there's everyone else. But who gets to be in the canon? That lionized, body of books You know, who makes it into the Encyclopedia Britannica? I mean, listen to the name, the Encyclopedia Britannica. I'm old enough to remember those big, thick books.
Me
Now we
too. I
have
used to
Google and
read
the
them.
internet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and they're good for a lot of things, right? Nothing is only ever one way or the other, but that it's this system, and I'll just name it, a colonialist, imperialist, capitalist, power over, dominant. I must do better than you or hold power over you, or extractive, non-sustainable system for collective connection and embodied humanity and relationality. It just isn't. So all of these anxieties, all these traumas, all of these feelings people have of rigidity and tightness and whatever in their body, yes, you've got it all there because you've got it all. So leaning into this work actually helps unlock that and unleash this. So you can actually sink down into who you really are and connect, not as just some I'm performing service to you person. I'm giving you $50. I'm giving you $100. I'm doing therapy for you or on you or with you or whatever.
Right.
You're right there in it as
In
a member of the
solidarity
human.
with, right? In
Absolutely.
solidarity. Yeah.
And how different that feels.
Very different. Very
You
different.
know?
You know, it's so interesting how when you're not attuned to this, that I don't know, it sneaks in interesting ways, because I go to a heavily indigenous population. They have 14 different indigenous tribes in Mexico. I go there every year for about 6 weeks to 2 months. And I love going to the villages and interacting and being connected. And I just, you know, I also do some volunteer work, but one of the Mexican women that I really highly value, she's a lot of social justice work. She's an attorney down there named Eloisa. She was, and also another woman who teaches at Harvard about social issues. She's there also. We were having this conversation that even the way they run the volunteer thing, where we're trying to help people get their products sold for good prices and not have a middleman, so they actually get the money, you know, because they work so hard to create these beautiful things. They were saying how it was just another example, even through the volunteer idea, of colonization, because it was the kind of white people helping, you know, and it really needed to shift out of white people being the organizers to the indigenous people owning and operating and doing all that. So now they actually are in the process of shifting responsibilities to the indigenous and kind of honoring their way of doing it. I mean,
Beautiful.
they see time completely differently. Like you say, let's meet at 9, and they might show up at 11, because time is not linear. So it's a whole different way of understanding things. One of the things they actually did that I thought was kind of cool is the president of Mexico was trying to get money to the indigenous people, because they are big wealth gap. I mean, huge wealth gap. They don't even speak Spanish, and often they each speak their own language. They can't even communicate to each other. But they were trying to get money to them to, you know, for food, basically. I mean, they were starving, and also to support their work, and they could buy materials to do what they want to do, what they're so skilled at doing. And I kept getting, through corruption, this money would disappear. So they finally decided to give everybody an ATM card with $300 or whatever it was every month, that they could just go to the ATM machine and get cash. So it would go directly to them. So they have to think about all these things to make that work. But I thought that was a beautiful example of making it work. But and even being careful as you're volunteering, like you said, helping and serving. We don't tend to think of that as a possible extension of colonization, even though it's well-intentioned. I mean, it's definitely well-intentioned, and I was well-intentioned myself when I was doing it, but really trying to keep empowering the folks to do this on their own. Partly we were having to help with language, because a lot of the indigenous folks didn't speak English or Spanish, and when people come to buy, they usually speak English or Spanish. So, you know, just that is helpful, but not to take away or not to reduce education on how to own your own business, so to speak, in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think that what you're highlighting here is the best thing to do is just always ask. Ask, don't do, ask.
Yeah.
How can I help? Can I help? And then be patient and wait, you know? Like I remember my uncle, you know, a long time ago was in the Peace Corps, and he was in Sierra Leone, and he said that, like, you know, he was trying to like do these things. He was an engineer, and like, you know, build these waterways or do whatever, you know, and like finally, like he just had to sort of like sit down and just be like, hey, Pa, like to whoever the elder was in the village, and just sort of like sit with him for a while. And it's kind of like the sniff test, you know, like, who are you? I don't know if I even want your help. I didn't ask you to come here. oh, really? All right, well, have some coffee with me or some whatever. Not like, all right, let's get to work, you know? And so these things, like you say, it takes time, right? Like we say, slow is fast. We say time is nonlinear. The nervous system settles over time. You know, this is getting back to the natural order of things. What I really want to emphasize is these are structural issues. And we are in the structure of this systemic, top down, better than system. So we inherit that in terms of how we navigate the world, when we wake up, how we run meetings, how we are with one another. These are things that affect us in so many different ways. And some people may even be uncomfortable with the conversation that we're having because they're like, well, all that's political. And, you know, I don't want to deal. I love all people. Everybody's the same to me. I treat everybody the same.
Which is
Well,
color blindness, right?
tell me about your learning there.
Well, just that's such an insensitivity. We lose our sense of uniqueness. When we say everybody's the same, that's not true. I mean, we're all maybe biologically the same, right? You know, we're made out of the same flesh and blood, but that you're not really acknowledging someone's uniqueness and their unique gifts and their unique culture and what they can provide from that place. I was listening to an interview of a young Muslim man, and he was saying that all of his white friends, you know, in college, they all thought they knew him really well. They felt like, well, you know, we know you. And he said they didn't know me at all, because he was just mostly what they were able to take in from him was where they were similar, like maybe their music interests or their sports interests or their educational interests, but they weren't inquiring to his life as a Muslim man, which is very, very different
Right.
from theirs, where they were mostly, you know, cisgendered males with possibly Christian or Judaic Christian background. I mean, and he said from their perception, they felt like they knew him really well. Hey, we're all the same. We're all just buds, you know. And he goes, they were just basically dismissing 90% of me, you know,
Right.
and that's what we think we're saying something that's kind-hearted, you know, oh, you're just like me, but that's not true. I think, you know, we're both women, obviously, cisgendered women right now, but some of us as women have felt these minimizations just as gender, right? In an all-white male world, which is the most privileged position, right? So you can check out your social currency by checking off different things that you are or you're not. And so I think that's maybe a doorway to understanding that sometimes your work is minimized just because the fact of your gender. But this is a bigger piece to embrace, because it involves so many levels of differentiation, and color blindness is one of the issues that comes up for people when we say things, and we might even be saying that out of feeling loving, you know.
Right.
Hey,
Right.
you know,
And
we're the same. It's an innocence, and also at the same time a mistake, right? We don't
right.
realize the
It's
hurt
an
we're inflicting.
ignorance.
It's an ignorance, and I loved it. I talked to Scott Whipple. He's SCP, and he's in New York too. He teaches some of this work in NYU, and he was telling me that one of the big things they really try to talk about is your intention is one thing, right? You might have a really open-hearted, loving intention, but the impact you also have to understand. So the intention of saying you're all like me, or I'm like you, or we're all the same, the intention might be fine, but the impact could be extremely hurtful to someone. And we have
Absolutely.
to hold and be aware and not get defensive. That's, I think, one of the biggest things as a white person, is to, when some of these things are pointed out, to really be take it in and learn where they coming, what's this coming from, and how do we understand this in a deeper way. Because, you know, I taught internationally all over the world, so I've been in many, many different cultures as a teacher, and that has been so good for me. And like you said, to learn to ask the question when I would be stepping on a cultural toe, which I knew was going to happen, and I mean, I couldn't know everything right about all international cultures, but I tried to educate myself. But I learned from my graduate work is in higher education and social change. And one of the most valuable things I learned from that program was studying, I think it's Paulo Freire, I might be mispronouncing it.
Yeah.
I
Palaferi.
love him. And
Mm-hmm.
he just taught me so much about asking a question an open-ended question that kind of hits what you're thinking is uncomfortable, and just trying to ask the question and then listen. Just shut up, basically, and not speak from your culture. We can't help but speak from our culture. I mean, we are our culture. It's ingrained in a lot of ways. But how to ask the right question, and I have a lot of examples of that I used over the years. It was so helpful.
That's so beautiful. And it goes back to sort of my mindfulness training, which is like the don't know mind or beginner's mind. When you really are, you know, in your embodied spirit, it's okay. You don't have to have the knowing. You are the knowing. You and every other living being in the cosmos is a part of the knowing. You are that, but you don't have to be in a place where you're always extracting data and information so that you can put together the formula that's going to make the next thing, quote unquote, happen, right? Because that's the difference between letting something come organically. And we know this in our practices when we do trauma work. We know what it's like when we see behaviorists trying to, you know, do certain kinds of quote unquote therapy, and how that can be really ineffective and damage causing in many ways, because we're trying to put something onto something. But when we get to the subcortical synaptic responses and the, you know, limbic system and the emotional learnings, if you're now sort of talking about Bruce Ecker's work and the coherence therapy work, and all the ways in which EMDR, SC, sensory motor psychotherapy, all these things, brain spotting, really work with the limbic system and the emotional learnings that are fused up in there underneath, and then unlock those responses and let something new drop in and emerge. That's what takes. That's transformation. That's lasting change. And by golly, we can do it. We can do it at a both local and greater macro level. So I just think that this awareness piece and leading into that with that curiosity from this place of, as Jack would say, noble and dignified, taking your seat in the midst of it all, whatever's going on, you know, who are you to not be fabulous? The Marianne Williams quote.
I love that quote.
You know,
yeah, I love that quote.
Who are you not to be? Aren't you that? You know, Terry Real just talks about self-esteem from his mentor, Pia Melody. I'm enough and I matter. Same as, no better than, no worse than.
Mm-hmm.
And the inheritance of colonization for so many people, especially for, I think, white women in this field, is that of shame. I'm not good enough. I have to earn my worth. I have to do for others. I have to be a helper. I am the wounded healer. Well, you know, okay, sort of, maybe. Or you're just a person.
Mm-hmm. Right, doing their part, right.
And you know what I'm saying? And the identification with shame, if it grows, fuses with this level of self-contempt that becomes quite narcissistic in a way that feels bad internally, but cuts us off from that true partnership and connection and allyship with others that would actually make us feel better. Mm-hmm. When we don't have to worry, I'm going to say the wrong thing, because we trust, hey, I'm being curious. I've done this work. I've taken these classes. I've read these books. I'm okay with this. You know what? I went through 6 months of hell when I realized how shitty, oops, excuse my French, we can bleep that out.
Okay. That's okay.
You know,
that's okay.
we have treated and continue to treat other people in this culture, you know, and around the world, by the way, but I'm talking about America because the United States of America, because it's a good example of what we're doing. I know you have viewers all over the world, but in Australia, you know, there's the same, there's, you know, in South America, there's a lot of that. And a lot of it does have to do with skin color. So my own personal experience was 6 months of this work. I was floored. I was down. I was flabbergasted. I was, whoa. I was overwhelmed.
I agree. No, I'm experiencing some of that as I'm going through it too. And it's very visceral and raw and painful. And you really have to notice any of your distancing behaviors or shutting down or not taking in, and really hang in there to listen and be available to be uncomfortable. But the benefit is huge. And I just want to say to everybody that's attempting to move in these directions to be more educated, you need to set some time apart to metabolize it and to feel what you feel, and to, as your awareness grows about this, it's really important, but also challenging.
And I just would invite you there to say that, isn't it nice to do it together? Isn't
Yes.
it nice to do it with another group of people who are walking through the same process? And that's why these classes that I'm talking about are so beautiful. They're for lighter white-skinned privileged folks who have, you know, a certain middle or higher social class who are interested in leaning into doing some of this work. Dr. Joy DeGrew's class is actually for anyone and a lot of folks who are of African-American descent to take that class also, but you will learn so much if you take that class. And these books, you know, like I said, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad, any number of them, post-traumatic slave syndrome, like I said, there's just so many where it just starts to wake you up. But if you can do it together, like Mindful of Race by a woman named Ruth King, she talks about how do you start a racial affinity group. And it's essentially like a book club, but it's 3 people, 4 people, 5 people of the same race. So you might have 5 of your white friends meeting together on Zoom or in your living room or whatever. And you talk about these kinds of issues and you just commit to once a month and you do it for at least a year. And maybe you do a book club too or something, but that's just talking about the construct of race, not about Black people, not about Hispanics, not about Asians, about what you're interrogating whiteness. And as Resmaa Menakem talks about, also a social worker and an SCP, somatic experiencing practitioner, he talks about you know, racialized trauma and interrogating white body supremacy, right? Because you see these words like white supremacy, people think, oh my God, you know, I'm not a neo-Nazi. No, you're not. I hope not. I don't think so, you know, but you could be racist and not know it, and that's okay. I think we all, you know, carry implicit biases that we don't know about. And if you're going back to this mindfulness teaching, the root of which is, you know, the Buddha's teachings, which is, you know, clarity of mind, then you're okay with leaning into, well, what is it that I'm making an assumption about that I really don't know to be true? How can I base something on my direct experience, right?
Right.
And when you're tuning into the body and you sense your aversion or your discomfort, oh, I don't know, that person looks a little, I don't want to go there, I'm going to go here. Just notice. Just notice. You don't have to judge, just notice. Be open to the noticing. And then take the classes and then understand a little more, right? And then you can understand it from an attachment perspective, a neurobiological perspective. You can do a million things, but then you can move in towards solidarity in a way that I think without doing the work is harder to do.
I think that's really true. I'm glad we're underscoring that. And we know we're going to be giving you a list of things that Francesca recommends, as well as books I've been recommending. In addition, I like Ibram Kendi's
Kendi.
work, and of course Resmaa Menakem's course, books on his grandmother's hands, and the newer one he has coming out. So all of these are just so helpful as a beginning point, and to really fuel an ongoing exploration. It's well worth it. It's well worth the journey. So I invite all of you to go deeper and explore and learn and grow.
Yeah, and also expand and learn and grow and explore the notion of trauma for you, right? Because a lot of times, like even Janina Fisher the other day, I was listening to her, a lot of you know her, she works in the sensory motor psychotherapy and sort of parts work around dissociation a lot. But, you know, she was just saying that, you know, for some people, yes, trauma is in the past. Like Bessel van der Kolk talks about trauma is basically, you know, the past and the present, you know, and we want to like unblend those if you're using internal family systems language, and you want to like just sit right here in the now.
Right.
But for a lot of people who are marginalized, sitting right here in the now isn't.
It's still traumatizing. It's still microaggressions and being marginalized and looked over and invisible and not having a voice.
Right. So trauma informed is a misnomer if we're not including in that our awareness and our work, our actual work that you just talked about doing, that can be a little dysregulating, and it feels sometimes unsafe to people, but it's actually just more like it's uncomfortable. So we're wanting to, Dan Siegel, expand our window of tolerance. We're wanting to open that up and be able to have a greater capacity, as your colleague Burns Galloway talks a lot about, you know, the demand and the capacity. Well, we're inviting in a little bit of demand because we already have the privilege. So can we, as trauma therapists, know that we can regulate ourselves, that we can do this, you know, molecule by molecule, and then expand and expand and expand, because then we really do feel like we're connected with everyone.
Right.
And how different that is, and how much better that feels, rather than this piece that I think we inherit with the imperialistic, colonialistic, patriarchal thinking, which is just how we are. It's just it's extractive, which is the way we see profit margins, and we see with the planet what's happening. That is not actually sustainable. That when we are in that collective place, we feel so much better. But without that, we're kind of dissociated.
Right, we're disconnected. We're in our own little bubble.
And
you know, it's a particularly interesting challenge in our profession, because I think our profession, for whatever reason, seems to be highly tilted to the dominant culture. And I mean, like when people come in, people of color or of different ethnic backgrounds or different sexual orientations, you know, I think maybe LGBTQ is more represented than people of color even, but there's still this sort of dominance in our profession. And so, like, how do we have people who come in and feel comfortable in our trainings and feel comfortable in graduate school when maybe they're the only person of color in a sea of, you know, white or light skinned people, and they have the sensitivity about that, you know, and
well,
what's
like
their
Stephen
experience
Porges, it's
like?
about safety.
Yeah. And how do you feel safe if you're like, I mean, if you imagine yourself being the only person in an all Black or all Asian or all something else, you know, population, would that be extra discomfort? Probably, right?
Right, exactly. If you as a white woman were in a room of Black men or Black men and women, you know, how would you notice that?
Yeah, because I actually had this. I was down south. I think I went to see Malcolm X or something, and I was the only. My husband was with me at the time, so we were the only two people that were not African American. And I think they were looking at us like, "What are you doing there?" But at the same time, and you, of course, you notice the difference, right? Your alertness kind of goes up, and it's just
Right.
even to maybe intentionally put yourself in that position sometime to experience that, I think could be helpful. It was a helpful experience for me, actually.
Yeah, I think it was Jack Cornfield and Trudy Goodman. I think I heard them say that they had done some virtual reality thing that was available in California or something, where they kind of like you put yourself in an environment that would be akin to that. But the point is that that's the lived reality and experience of so many
All the
people
time, all the
when
time.
you're not in the center of that wheel, when you're not
Right.
the one with all of the things. And a lot of women will say like, well, I know what that's like because I'm a woman, and you know, and there's a whole thing there too about white feminism versus intersectional feminism or Black radical feminism. And you know, it sounds like so woo, you know, like is there violence? Is it, you know, is there, you know, Black Panthers? Is there whatever? No, what we're talking about is real equity and equality for everyone. And so our liberation is inner-bound. You can't be free if I'm not free. You
Right.
as a white person who's in a privileged position hold a position of power that you inherited, right or wrong, good or bad, you asked for it or didn't. You came into this world as an embodied spirit. That's beautiful. That's great. And you also were born into a structure of oppression. That's just how it
Right.
is.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
our liberation is intertwined, meaning that, you know, there's this little gray cloud that just kind of spits all the time, and it shows up in like, oh, I feel ashamed, or gee, I don't feel good enough, or gee, you know, it's actually like, no, it's fine, like let's let's do this work to dig under the tunnel and come into, and then you're just going to be like, oh my God, because then we won't do things like cultural appropriation and steal other culture. Like you see
Right.
a very well-known, to remain unnamed, reality TV show family that takes everything that's beautiful from Black culture and that's creative and that's celebratory and that ports it over and does it from a white body and then becomes a billionaire. That's not appropriate.
No, no, not at
Just
all.
like, you know, a lot of people have thoughts about yoga and the appropriation of that. And that's not appropriate in the way without, again, let me honor, at the very least, I am on Lenape and Canarsie land. This is really
Right.
not my home. You know what
Right.
I mean? This is the home of those people, the indigenous people who are here.
Right.
My ancestors' home is in Africa, from Haiti, from
Hmm.
Spain, from the Dominican Republic, and from Italy.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? We all ended up here, but
Hmm.
it's that there was genocide that happened, residential schools until just a few decades ago,
Hmm.
where indigenous Americans were literally like plucked from families and put into schools where they had to wear uniforms, learn English, forget about their native tongue. I mean, this is not old.
No.
And, I guess there's all kinds of ways to ally and partner. There's ways to fund, sort of land ownership projects, and the U.S. and Canada. You're doing stuff down in Mexico or Central America. There's all kinds of ways, and I mean, again, you can shoot me an email or whatever it is, and go to my website to find out a few of the things. But it's really just more the intention of, do I really want to go to the mall and just like sort of, play Uno again, or do whatever people do with their free time, which is fine. It's good to regulate. It's good to knit. It's good to crochet. It is. Play with your dog, go for a walk, be in nature. It is. And we can also do another piece that isn't performative. It's embodied and it's connected. I'm not doing for you. I am having, from a position of abundance, in this way, sharing and also taking in the pain, taking in the grief, taking in the longing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be with that.
There is a lot of grief when you start to be aware of all these inequities. Yeah.
But what is grief and trauma the portal to?
Right. It brings us to the transformation. We have more capacity for bigger compassion and more right action, more ability to do what's truly helpful. Like you said, listening and collaborating and trying to understand what people are wanting, not just imposing what you think they should have. It's a whole different, there's a lot of shifting. I have to say, we all kind of think we know a little bit about it, but when you start to really go into it, there's so much to learn. And to go in with beginner's mind and to really listen and participate. And then always think also have it be more than knowledge, but a call to action. I think that's also important. Like I know recently, I think it was Sandra Butler, she's African-American, I believe it. She'd been in the jail system. She'd gotten some injury, got hooked on, I don't know, maybe opioids. I'm not sure the exact details of the story, but in and out of jail because of that, and then eventually started a big movement in California to remove the box off the employment form that says, are you a felon or not? Because once you check that, you just can't, you're not employable most of the time. So that people come out of prison, they don't have anywhere to go. They often can't rent a place. So they're trying to do all these different things. There's things that we can do once we're aware, not to go immediately into fixing, because you don't know enough about it to fix anything in the beginning. You need just a lot of learning that has to happen. And then really collaborating and trying to see, well, okay, maybe if I help with language skills in a school, or maybe if I, make sure
whatever
my impatience
your
doesn't,
gift is.
Yeah. And also even little things like if somebody calls on you as a white person, before someone of a person of color, because they put you first, that you make sure you put the other person in the line first, that they actually were supposed to be next. There's a lot of things you can do to ask and inform yourself to be more in solidarity with.
Definitely.
And not listening or tolerating racial slurs, just
well, it's like the person who stands by and I'm the bystander when I see a gang rape. No, you actually go in and you say something, or you turn the volume up so loud that nobody can stand to be in the room. So because their ears are falling off, and you get, that person out of there, the white silence, you know what I mean? That's what it's sort of, called, and the white racial fragility. No, you can actually take action by leaning in. And yes, it means that you're putting yourself out there a little bit. A lot of people don't want to do this like on their Instagram feeds or Facebook or Twitter, it is, because they don't want to lose friends, because they're going to get people like unfriend them or unlike them. Well, it's a way that you can actually show partnership and allyship and show up. If you've done the work, it won't scare you. You won't care.
Well, you mentioned once you've done the work, and you even for therapists, they put that on their resume or their website or whatever, that then they open the door to possibly being able to be co doing the journey with someone that's different from them, which is also needed. People need really good, skilled people to interact with that really are attuned to them, or willing to repair when they do a misattunement.
And there will be, just like that, rupture and repair, rupture and repair. Oops, ouch, oops, I said something I shouldn't have, or I noticed that, and I'm accountable for it. I'm not going to get stuck in a shame spiral. And I'm going to just say, I'm sorry I did that. There's probably a better way to say it. I couldn't think of it at the time. Let me try to rephrase that, or what should I have said? Or let me just pause here for a minute because my foot's in my mouth. Fine. It's okay.
Right.
You know, that's good. You know, and the more you
Beautiful.
practice, you know what I'm saying? Like it's not a problem because people will sense your intention.
Yes.
It's not about, it's like, okay, and even saying and naming, I am doing some work around this, or I'm trying to deepen my embodiment, my understanding, my,
So
you
being
know, my
authentic and
presence.
transparent and vulnerable.
Yeah. You know, like it's okay, you know, like it's not a problem. And it reminds me of the mindfulness teaching, the, you know, the sort of fierce compassion, you know, it's what's skillful and it's what's not skillful, to know what to do or what not to do. And you know, when you're there and you don't have, you already have self-esteem, it's not a problem to say mea culpa, because that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean, oh, I don't have a right to exist. That may
Right.
be if you're learning from the way your mom treated you when she was being abusive or neglectful, but that doesn't mean that that's what you have to believe about yourself and carry into interactions like this. Because really, when we resolve our stuff at that personal level, at that little nuclear family level, it does really open us up to being able to lean into these other things without that extra baggage,
Yes.
right? Which is
Yes.
part of inherited collective trauma of that whole system.
Right.
Right? Like
Right.
the 5 o'clock martini mom that wasn't available is definitely also part of the inheritance of the big structural issues that we've been talking about for generations back. So it's kind of beautiful when you can do it, and when you do it and you're calling in, like in my experience, like you're calling me now. When did we first start talking about this? A year ago?
At least a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and there's like little seeds that have been planted. You know, some of the trauma communities are starting to actually take these classes, like the one that you're in, some of the practitioners. But man, it was just a lot of talk about it for a while before
Right.
anybody bit. And that's
Right.
okay.
Right. It takes it.
It's a
Yeah.
long game, you know, it's
Yeah.
fine. We're not going to get it all. And we can do, like, we can pick our place. Like you said, oh, do you want to teach this or go into school or work on the checking box thing? Like,
Mm-hmm.
pick something. Like, you're
Right.
not going to do everything. Like, pick something that's based on your gifts.
Right. Perfect.
You
That's a
know,
great recommendation.
see where the need is, ask whether or not what you might have to offer is welcome or if it could be of service. If somebody says no, don't take it personally. Find another place,
Mm-hmm.
or offer it somewhere else, or check back in another 6 months. You know what I mean? When you're not
Yeah.
in the way of your own stuff, it's so much easier. And then you'll find your way, you'll find your connection, you'll find your place, and that'll be satisfying.
Well, this is really wonderful. I think we're close to the end of our time. I just want to see if there's anything else you want to mention. I know there's endless things to talk about here, and it's a beginning, which I'm so appreciative of. And
It's,
I know you've done some deep work here, Francesca.
yeah,
So thank you.
and I have a lot more to do. I mean, listen, we're all just, you know, in this,
Yeah.
and more in this. And mm, it was, I'll say this, and you said it too, but I'm going to emphasize it. It's so beautiful when you can actually lean in and do the work, and it's going to make you feel really uncomfortable, most likely. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if
We
you're,
can, if we've been doing therapy for a long time and working on ourselves, we should be a little bit used to going into the discomfort. But this might take it to another level. So I think, like the suggestion you made about doing it in a group, doing it with support,
mhm,
talking to other people about it. I found all sorts of allies once I've started reading the books. I found out people that were reading the same books. I got book recommendations for a ton of people that were really good. And so we have this new way to share, and
right,
it's been really wonderful.
right. And I would just call on anyone who's doing their own, you know, their trauma communities, their whatever. It's one of my indigenous focusing oriented therapy leader, you know, teacher. She says post-traumatic stress recovery,
Yeah.
post-traumatic stress healing, post-traumatic stress, you know, reconnection. You know,
Yes. Yes.
it's let's, you know, naming things matters too.
Yeah. Post-traumatic growth. Yes.
Post-traumatic growth, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and it is that, it's a growth mindset. So I would just say, you know, I know NARM recently did something kind of like this, another trauma community.
Right. I like
I know
that. That
that
was
Pat
good.
Ogden
Yeah.
Pat Ogden in sensory psychotherapy, she is doing work around this
Right.
within her training some. I think SE, somatic experiencing or SETI is
Yeah, we're doing a lot with it with the DARE work too. Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing it. So I would just encourage everyone to continue to just
I would recommend the course I'm in. By the time we air this, I'll have completed the course because I only like tonight. I'm done, but not done, but done with this course.
Yes.
Is Patty Dye and Victor Lee Lewis. He was in Color of Fear, which is also a wonderful documentary to watch. But we'll have many recommendations for you. You can pick and choose what
it's
you're
just it's
drawn
a
to.
lifetime. Just make a commitment to just saying, I'm gonna weave this in. I'm gonna weave
Mm-hmm.
this in.
Right.
I'm not going to just Netflix and chill for another night. I'm going to.
Well, if you're Netflix and you want it to be relevant, you can watch Best of Enemies, or you can watch the one on Miles Davis, which is the history of racism in America. I mean, you can even Netflix on this if that's the way it comes in for you, because I'm a Netflix fan myself, but I like to read and I like to participate actively as well. Thank you for joining us tonight, for being together here with Francesca Maximé, and she has so much to offer. Check out her podcast, check out her website, maximayclarity.com. She's been really exploring in so many different directions, so it's a gift, as always, to have you with us, Francesca. Thank you so much.
Really my pleasure, Diane. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Hi, good to see you all. Although I can't really see you because this is a webinar, I really do enjoy seeing your faces when I can. But here we are. I've been sort of chatting with you a little bit on the question and answer and on the chat. I hope that you like that talk. That was a talk, just so you know, that was recorded in March of 2020. And so a lot happened since then in terms of the uprising, in terms of the summer that we had with COVID, and even where we are now post-election. And just today, December 14th, the electoral votes finally solidifying for the 20th time Joe Biden's presidency. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about what your questions are. Please put them in the Q&A box. And thank you, Shoba. Yeah, we have about 25 minutes. So we're going to go until 8:30. So Andrea Flanders asked in the chat, she says, wonderful talk, love Francesca's sensibility. My question as a white therapist is about how best to bring up and name issues with some of my diverse clients. I've had a number of Muslim clients and have one currently, and they seem reluctant to talk about their experience of others' reactions to them in San Francisco Bay Area of San Francisco. And I put in the chat box, first of all, Andrea, one of the things that I might recommend is that, you sort of yourself familiarize yourself with whatever the issues are that are happening in the Muslim community now, whatever those are. And I don't know this to be true for sure, but I would recommend trying, and I will actually look myself. I never really used to use Twitter that much, but I do get a lot of information from there. And I'm a former journalist, so I'm kind of a little bit more facile with it a little bit, but you can just use it to extract information. You don't have to like post. If you do a hashtag Black Twitter, or if you do a hashtag Native Twitter, sometimes you'll get a lot of whatever is happening within certain communities on Twitter. And there may be, I'm not saying there is, but there may be a hashtag that, as Muslim Twitter or Islamic Twitter or something, and you may find more about what's happening in the Muslim community in your area. You can also contact some of the Muslim organizations that are in California or national Islamic organizations, and get on their mailing lists and, sort of get their email updates so that you can learn more about some of the issues that people are facing. If there are attacks, if there's a conversation happening about microaggressions, if there's something particular happening about a sort of new insidious form of racialized discrimination in the public school system or something like that. So I think that the more informed that you are and the more comfortable that you've become, do you even know when Eid al-Fitr is? Do you even know what the Islamic holidays are? Are those on your calendar? You can put those on alert so that you know. And if that, if a person is of Islamic faith, that you can wish them a happy holiday, or you can understand why, for example, they're celebrating at certain times. I remember when I grew up in a pretty white Christian Catholic town in Massachusetts, small little town. We didn't really have, to my knowledge anyway, there were obviously a little bit of diversity, but pretty much it was white and Christian. When I moved to New York, I learned when the Jewish holidays were, and Lashana Tova, and, now it's Hanukkah. And, I sort of learned, oh, September, October, November, these are more Jewish holiday timeframes, Eid al-Fitr. I worked for a Turkish TV station where a lot of people were Muslim and would pray 5 times a day. There was a special room in the TV station. So the more familiar that you can be with what is happening in community, I think the more comfortable people are going to be as far as that part is concerned. I'm going to go back to your question. You say, my question as a white therapist is about how to best bring up and name issues like what, Andrea, with some of my diverse clients, issues of racial discrimination, of religious discrimination. They seem reluctant to talk about their experiences of other reactions. The other thing I would say is it's perfectly fine to say a name. And I say this all the time to white therapists. If they're talking with someone who's non-white, or it could be someone who's able-bodied, who's talking to someone who's not, able-bodied, or it could be whatever version of, as we were talking about earlier in the positionality piece, that given a structurally oppressive society, that the person who's a therapist not only is in the power position of being the therapist, but is also in the power position of having greater equity, or in that structural, level of an oppression wheel, more power, that you just name, hey, I am very aware that I am a cisgendered, heterosexual, white female therapist of a certain age, of upper middle class, with a certain kind of education. And I grew up with this kind of a background, religious wise, sort of first language being English wise, and those kinds of things. And I know that our experiences may be very different. You and the person may or may not have been born in the US, which is important insofar as that, they may or may not have the direct immigrant experience, or they may be the descendant of immigrants. But I would name those things, and I would say, and I'm aware that there may be some issues between the two of us in terms of, sort of intuitive understanding in terms of our lived experience, because our lived experience may be a bit different. But I also want to be available to you in all ways, and have us be able to connect at a human level, and really just want you to feel free to let me know that if there is a hesitancy around safety, or if there's a hesitancy around lack of understanding, not that I expect that it's your job to teach me, but I'm going to be doing my own work around understanding more about the Muslim community in service to our therapeutic alliance and our therapeutic relationship. And I'm going to be reading books, and I'm going to be taking classes, or I'm going to be looking at the newspapers or the websites or whatever it is. But that you please do tell me and let me know when and if I say or do something that you feel is kind of tone deaf or lacking, that I'm open to hearing that feedback. I can take it. I want to hear it, because I want to be able to, be there for you and with you, and meet you as best as I can. And if for any reason this is an issue or a place where it becomes that it's too big, I don't want you to feel unsafe or feel constricted in our work together. And I want to be able to make sure that you continue to know that you have agency. You're under no obligation to continue to work with me if for some reason I am not able to meet you in a place that feels supportive and nourishing. So, I mean, those are some suggestions, and the same could be said of other of other populations that have been marginalized. Okay, follow-up question from Andrea. Thank you. Clients are mentioning their shame or talking with me about their relationships, and I'm asking about how or if their cultural background affects their attitudes or expectations in relationships. Okay, maybe you're talking about sex or something. I'm assuming you're talking about sex, relationships, like intimacy and things like that. But that's great, because that's the beginning. I actually have a couple of clients, because I work as a licensed psychotherapist in New York, but I also work around the country and around the world as a coach. And I have some clients in the Middle East who are seeing me internationally because, they don't want to have people who are there be all up in their business about whatever it is that they're doing and thinking, whether it's sexually or in relationships, or even just about how they think about the world. So what would I say about all of that? I would normalize it insofar as that as human beings, we all have questions about our sexuality or about our relationships, or around, the different ways in which culturally, coming from one culture or coming from, one background, it may be a little bit different here in the United States, in terms of what's expected or what you may feel you want to do or can do, given, the different various constraints. And I would just explore. You said they're feeling shame. Is it really shame that they're feeling, or is it more like discomfort? Like the whole thing about trauma is I have an impulse to want to do one thing, but then I'm sort of prohibited from doing that. And therefore, is it a teasing out of loyalty? Like, I don't feel like I'm being loyal to my faith or to my religion or to my culture. But really here in America, everybody's telling me it's a meritocracy. You got to go forth and conquer. You got to do, what all the Western people do and individuate and, brand yourself and whatever. I mean, I would honor and respect what often is the more collectivist nature of that kind of a culture, family oriented, intergenerational homes and families, and relationships that may have a power play around equity and around deferring to, perhaps, and I'm just making this up because I don't have a case in front of me here, but, if it's a wife, for example, who may defer to, if it's a cishet marriage in a Muslim family, a more dominant or patriarchal husband. But I would just stay curious. I would stay grounded. I would stay open. And I would just think about it in terms of power, in terms of, shame is about, I think I'm bad, versus guilt is about, I think I did a bad thing. As I said in the talk, there's no reason, and I hate saying this because people hate that. They hate giving up their shame. Shame is narcissistic. And I don't mean for your client. I mean, shame is about self-absorption. It's about this deep core belief that there's something wrong with me. Well, you feel like you're disowning your culture, your legacy, or something like that if you give up your shame, because by feeling bad, you feel loyal to something that you're conflicted about or torn about, which is your loyalty to, perhaps your cultural allegiance and your history that you want to honor. And so you feel bad that you have this like feeling of maybe, I don't want to say going beyond it, but, moving into the Western, sort of culture that you're presented with now. And so I would say, well, what happens if we didn't associate your essence is bad, that you're a bad person with that? What if we just held that there is conflict and we were very much non-dual about it? Yes, it's true that you want to uphold your cultural legacy and your relationship, and you're very aware of the power dynamics that come often in this history, this background, this culture. And you have a desire to whatever, be intimate, or to be speaking your voice, or to explore different things, or whatever it is. Can we hold both of those, all the while coming from the place of I'm enough and I matter, same as? And the wisdom of how much of that I actually share and show up with outside in my marriage, in my relationship, or out there culturally in the world will be the discernment that we have to enact. This is a core mindfulness training of what's skillful and what's not skillful, what's useful and not useful in that moment, which doesn't mean that I co-sign disempowerment for certain people. If it is a cishet marriage and it's the wife who's sort of more feeling shameful, I'm just making this up, but, and quiet in service to being with a more patriarchal husband, for example. I'm just, again, making this up. It doesn't, even if I'm acting in a way that preserves the family at that moment, it doesn't mean that I myself am giving up my own deepest self or my own deepest heart. There's a wisdom to understanding how do we balance the fabric of both and, but you can open that permission and recognize that it's not a binary choice, like an on-off switch. There's a dial there. Oh yes, there's this loyalty, there's this conflict here about feeling like you need to stay here. And then that brings up some shame. And then there's also this pull perhaps to be more independent or to do more of whatever it is that you want to explore. That's what I would do, give permission. Okay, moving on. 10 minutes. I hope that's okay. Andrea, clients are mentioning their shame. Okay, we already answered that. Would you respond or address a client who has been harmed by ableist policies and feel alone with their pain? Is there a way to address their pain without isolating them further? I would check in with this by you could use like an AEDP, Dianophosia, advanced experiential dynamic psychotherapy. Client say, Sally, when I hear you say this, I just want you to know that it makes me feel very sad or hurt or I'm sad inside when I hear this. It makes me angry at the structural, ableist policies that are there in the culture that we are all subjected to, that don't value everyone equally. And I am here with you in being outraged at that. And then you could perhaps go further and say, I want you to know that I'm here with you in this moment right now, and checking in with, what is it like for us to be here in that outrage together, in that sadness and in that grief together around this. That might be one way of doing the transformational bottom-up trauma piece there, to meet them and join with them without having to just like try to go in and fix it, because we don't always want to fix it without isolating them further. Okay, I hope that was enough. Would you be able to respond or address a client who has been harmed by ableist? Oh no, I did that one. Sorry for my typing. How would you respond or address a client who has been harmed by ableist policies without isolating them further? I think I tried to answer that. The part about shame and loyalty feels spot on. Oh, good, Andrea, thanks. Yeah, there's always a reason. If you look at Bruce Ecker's coherence therapy model and anything about memory reconsolidation, or if you look at any of the IFS, internal family systems work, and you're looking at all these like little quirky things that people do that can create big problems over time. Even if you look at Terry Real's model, relational life therapy, you look at all the stuff that Bruce Perry is doing. He just wrote a new book with Oprah that's coming out in April. It's not what, I don't know what it's called. It's not what you do, it's what happened to you or something, conversations about trauma and healing. There's a reason why we feel the shame. So our job as therapists is to help the person find what the reason is that they feel the shame and what's that very particular emotional learning that's associated with that. I know someone who's close to me who was able to drill down that it wasn't even like shame about like, I don't have a right to it, like I don't have, like, I'm not worthy. It was this core shame of, I don't have a right to exist. I don't have a right to exist. I don't have a right to be on this planet. I don't have a right to be walking around. That's heavy. And when you sort of look at that and you say, well, why might that have been helpful to not feel like I had a right? Where would that belief have come from? And then you unpack, well, raised in a heavily Catholic household in a certain period in time in the United States, and, where women were, treated a certain kind of way and needed to kind of go under, not over, and all those kinds of things, to not have your core sense of self. And of course, all the very, attachment ruptures in terms of early caregiver experiences that were not, attuned in the way that this person would have needed, you really can begin to understand. And so then you say, well, beautiful. I felt shame and like I didn't have a right to exist, because that way I could be there for everyone else. And that's what was being asked of me in my family structure as the eldest of, you know, a large family when the parents weren't around. And so for me to take myself out of the equation, it was what was needed in order for me to be able to support and in a, you know, Maslowian way, be able to give and provide to all those who needed it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have survived. So then you take that maladaptive piece and you say, look at how beautiful this was to helping everyone. And guess what? We're all still here, usually, hopefully, thank God. And now we can start to unpack that and check and see, okay, I believe that, but is that, it feels real, but is that really true? Okay. Daniel Herman, I appreciate your concrete examples of appropriate therapist sharing and use of self to acknowledge differences of lived experience, culture, identity, and the language of genuine connection and respect for the client's self-determination. Great. Sandra Sosa, thank you for a wonderful talk. I would like to hear your position about traditional cultural traits that are questioned by the people we work with in indigenous, rural, or minority populations. It is a frequent topic for me as an anthropologist and therapist, transgenerational systemic. We have like 3 minutes. Traditional cultural traits that are questioned by people we work with in indigenous, rural, or minority populations. I'm not 100% sure what angle you want me to come on this from, Sandra, but what I think you're pointing to is, here's what I have to say. Indigenous, rural, and minority populations have their own inner wisdom. It's all the shamanic stuff. It's all the stuff that we've known by the great creator. All these therapy models by Western, especially white men, are nothing more than repackaging and reformulating all of that, if you ask me, which most people don't want to hear. And they make money off of it and they package it and then they do some evidence-based whatever stuff and then it gets researched and published and, you know, whatever, but that has to get funded and all of that. Meanwhile, all the grandmothers are out there holding hands, making tea, knitting blankets, you know, cooking stew, and they're doing all of the healing work along the way too. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that in this culture, we, you know, have a lot of contempt for anything that is like what we would call craft or folk art, until of course it ends up in the Museum of Modern Art and it costs $50 million, then it's valued. So just stick with what you know. The people are wise, they know their traits, and I wouldn't introduce too much Western garbage if you can avoid it. Okay, Graham Stevenson, a curiosity is exactly right. Being able to walk with the other person, but it can be challenging, especially where your outlook is very different from their cultural beliefs and may present a sense of conflict within us. I exactly agree to what you're saying about both and. Yes, non-dual, both and. Make sure we always have enough space for all of it, both and. Okay, I think we're at time. I am looking at your chat here. My email is Andrea Flanders. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys my email address, info@francescamaximé.com. And then my website is maximeclarity.com. And call me, email me, whatever it is. I do a group every couple of weeks. At least I'm trying to, for like racialized trauma and sort of having these kind of open conversations. They're sort of like therapist case consultation type of things, but basically just reach out if you need me. I work with a lot of interracial couples also, and I work with a lot of folks on just basic stuff like, you know, nervous system regulation and feeling like you're here with whatever it is that's challenging. You're here, not being merged with it, but that we can start to titrate it and accompany it molecule by molecule in a very grounded, gentle, loving, holding space. Because the world is vast, right? We're part of this big universe. The big creator, you know, is what we're here with. I want you to bring a little more heart, you know, and soul and spirituality into, you know, and ritual even into your practice. You know, all this other stuff is just window dressing. You know, you don't have to be a therapist. Just be you. Come from here and everything will work out. Okay, I think that's it. And find me if you can find me. Yes, Indigenous Healing Lineages 100%. Okay. I guess we got to go. So I'll let you all go. It's my pleasure, and happy holidays to those who are celebrating things this time of year. And Sandra Sosa, if you'd like to reach me, just email me info@francescamaxime.com. Thank you, everyone. Take good care, and sending you lots of love. Bye-bye.